Welcome to Meditation.Podcast, episode 4. I'm Peter.
I'm Jeff.
In today's episode, we will ask the question, are you breathing right now? I know I wasn't until I asked the question. So we'll dig a little bit deeper into the 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga, which as a reminder means 8 limb, Asht 8 and Anga limb, which is a meditation framework developed or at least expounded upon in an ancient classic called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And it's embraced by the yogis as a kind of a framework or a scaffolding to help set up their meditation practice. So we'll dig into what those 8 limbs are, and then we'll finish with an exercise called Trataka, which literally means gazing at some object, usually a candle or a dot on a piece of paper. A lot of stuff to cover. You ready, Jeff?
Yeah, I have a question though. Before we get into the details of Ashtanga, what's the overall goal or purpose or function? Where does this fit in like the scheme of all of the things?
Yeah. It's a great question. Classically, and there are many different schools and derivatives of it that are based on the answer to that question. Some of them are a little bit more, I'll use the word religious, just because it has a common meaning to people. Meaning people practice this perhaps as almost like a scientific method to achieve some religious goal, like maybe some sort of contact with the divine, whatever that means to that group of people. It can also just mean, adopting a lifestyle that is conducive to practicing meditation and achieving the results of it, as it, I think, clearly can have a positive influence on all the other dynamics of your life, and adds a nice balance to the, just the chaos that we have in our perceptions now. There's so much going on in the world that we're bombarded with every day, whether it's work or something else we find out from a screen. That meditation offers a nice balance, which helps with health and just well-being. So it can just be a pursuit of well-being, or it can be a pursuit of something more larger to those people who are comfortable with that type of thing. It doesn't have to be, though. It can be totally without any concept of a divine realm. We're just talking about achieving a little bit of self-peace, peace of mind, and then carrying that out into the rest of our actions in the world. At least that's sort of my thought.
Cool.
Shall we dig in?
Yeah.
The first 2 limbs or steps I refer to as ethics. I don't think I'm the only one. Or life preparation for meditation. And the 2 Sanskrit terms, yama and niyama. Yama means to restrain or to hold back, and sort of refers to the things that you probably shouldn't be doing in life if you want to have a successful meditation practice. Simply because it disturbs the mind. And I think everyone's personal experience can confirm that if you've just had some sort of violent experience, if you were to try to sit down, that's what would be in your mind, distracting you from the practice. And then niyama, the opposite in a way, is rather than restraining. So now that we've restrained some things that tend to be, destructive, what should we start to do in life? What sort of life practices should we have in theory to help support a successful meditation practice? Some schools of thought break them down into maybe 5 discrete yamas and 5 discrete niyamas. Maybe there are 10 in other schools. So the chart at the bottom articulates some of the more common yamas and niyamas. Ahimsa, nonviolence. Satya, truthfulness. Asteya, not stealing. Brahmacharya, which literally means following the path of Brahma. Self-restraint. And aparigraha, non-possessiveness. And so these are Sanskrit terms taken from the Yoga Sutras and other interpretations of them as kind of a set of prescription of things that over time you can work on restraining these things if you're doing them now. Like if you have some sort of violent lifestyle or excessive lifestyle, there's no judgment about whether that's good or bad. It's simply a recognition that it's not conducive to meditative practices. They create distractions in the mind. What do you think about that, Jeff?
Yeah, so that's very similar to Buddhist ethics. Probably the most comparable would be the 5 precepts, which are almost identical to the yamas. It's non-killing, which in its extreme sense is non-violence entirely. Don't steal is the same. Don't lie is the same. No sexual misconduct, which is a little different than this one, I think, because it's like don't have sex with people who are under the protection of someone else is the wording of it, which means somebody who's like married or is a child, who has a parent taking care of them, something like that.
So it sounds very specific and almost moral in a way.
Yeah, but it's treated similarly, at least in the commentaries, that it's not a moral obligation, but it's a way to help you along the path.
Yeah.
And then the last one is no intoxicants, which doesn't seem to be on this one.
That's interesting.
The other 4 are almost identical.
That was one of the prescriptions also in a well-known spiritual organization called Scientology. No intoxicants, at least before you go to study or partake in auditing, which is effectively a form of guided meditation.
I thought you were going to say before noon.
But yeah, also in the Yoga Sutras, although interestingly enough, in the 4th part of the Yoga Sutras, Kaivalya, which means liberation, which is some scholars debate whether that was part of the original sutras or not. Irrespective of that, the very first, like book 4, Sutra 1, describes the use of herbs as sort of one method to achieve not a meditative state, but some of the kind of nice benefits of a meditative state, perhaps. Although it also says these methods are not permanent. So intoxicants, maybe intoxicants is different than the herbs they're talking about. But
yeah, it can be read broadly or narrowly. Like in the narrowest definitions of it, it's liquor specifically. And then more broadly, it's any intoxicating substances.
And why was that? Is that, I mean, it's just sort of from personal
because it interferes with the functioning of your mind, so it makes it harder to meditate.
Yep.
So it's the same thing. It's not and actually in one of the there's a couple of stories about why that rule exists, because it does seem different from the other rules, right? And one of the stories is about a monk who it's a long story. Anyhow, he's forced to get drunk, and because of that, he then betrays all of the other precepts because he's lost his inhibitions. So it's it is a slightly different rule.
What comes to mind, like I'm always feel like a little bit leery of, exact things you're not supposed to do. Like don't drink, if you're going to meditate or if you're going to practice, Buddhism or to follow this path. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I recognize that maybe for a while that's important, um, to help eliminate the dullness until you can achieve mastery of mind. And then, of course, later on, probably you don't want to drink. But there's also some groups, like I think the A-Gori yogis, and they see it more as something to learn how to coexist with, like drink, and then try to master that experience so that it doesn't subdue the mind.
Yeah, and so in Buddhism also there is they have the tantras, which is kind of, well, I mean, I guess that comes from yoga. Actually, I don't know which one caused the other, but they're similar, and that does involve the use, sometimes involves the use of drugs and alcohol,
Right.
for spiritual purposes, for practice. So,
which you can get caught up in for a long time and achieve nothing but distraction.
yeah,
That's the but sometimes for some people that's a path to do. Personally, I've found that anytime I drink alcohol, particularly in excess, the next day I just have a terrible time concentrating. I can't, in order to sit still and meditate, you have to be able to sit still without pain. And eventually alcohol kind of results in pain in my body. So from that perspective, it's very tangible why I wouldn't drink if I'm going to practice meditation. But we live in the culture that we live in, and alcohol is seen as both a social and nowadays a medicinal, uh, application to depression, really, and other things that are going on, which we could argue it could be solved with meditation. Because what is depression but potentially a series of unwanted thoughts and feelings that continue automatically with our inability to control them? Well, anyways, moving right along. Niyamas, some of the ones articulated. There's a typo there. It should just be saucha, not shaucha, which is purity or cleanliness. Santosha, contentment, which again is maybe an emerging value in our culture, but certainly for a while, I think our culture is never content, always trying to get more. So that's an interesting one, culturally at least. Tapas, which I put self-discipline or austerity. Again, that's sort of similar to contentment. I mean, in a way, if you're not seeking after other things, you can give things up. And tapas, I think, etymologically means like burning, literally, or heating up. The sort of seeds of things. Svadhyaya, which could be self-study, and that could be a very literal interpretation, as in meditation, when you're looking within, both looking within the mind and looking within the body, self-study. Self can also be interpreted as, in a more religious sense, with like a capital S, the self. So scriptural or spiritual studies, whatever that means to you, each person has their own set of things they're inclined to study. Or maybe it means the study of other individuals who you respect, who sort of practiced a lifestyle that you respect. So svadhyaya. And then another one that's kind of difficult to interpret in our culture, but Ishvara Pranadhana, unless you grow up from a religious background and you are comfortable with the concept of, say, God. But in the more, I think a lot of the contemporary culture, particularly the scientific culture, has a difficult time with that word. So rather than, one interpretation of Ishvari Pranadhana is like kind of surrender to the idea of God, or contemplation, I should say, of God, contemplation of the infinite. Like that is what you have in mind. That's what you're holding in mind. Or I just put self-contemplation. So those are tough ones to translate. Jeff, what are your thoughts on those? And also the Buddhist counterpart.
Yeah, so this is interesting because it's where we have some divergence from Buddhism. Uh, Purity and contentment are definitely there. Which is tapo in Pali, yeah, it means heat, also there, and it refers to the heat of austerities, and it's not talked about a lot, but it is seen as a positive quality. But self-discipline, self-study, and self-contemplation are sort of things that are explicitly denied by Buddhism. You don't have a self.
Mm.
That's not something that you're focusing on.
What about certainly in Buddhism, there's emphasis on study of, say, scriptures or, whatever they are,
Yeah,
sutras. So I would put that, like study of the self, meaning study of the Dharma might be another way, I think, that'll be more comparable in concept. The purpose of Svadhyaya. Purpose of Svadhyaya is kind of studying that which is true.
yeah. Yeah, so it's similar in a way, but there definitely the self part of it is reduced a lot. And even the study part is reduced a lot. There is a sense in which, while you are supposed to memorize certain things to help with your meditation so that you can keep them in mind, uh, you really should spend most of your time in meditation.
Yeah.
And not so much, I don't think it's so outwardly focused generally. And it's hard to say that, but I mean, there's definitely, like, the Tibetans spend enormous amounts of time in studying. Like they spend years and decades. They have a huge amount of literature that they study. So it's not like a general. It's not 100% true, but I think generally the focus is more on meditation and a
Yeah.
little less on studying, and certainly less on the self part of it.
Yeah, and there's a path of yoga that's more oriented towards knowledge and study. That's called jnana. I think Jnana, jnana yoga. Ashtanga yoga is more of a, I think it might be considered Raja yoga, practical yoga, like, meditative yoga. So yeah, so these are the yamas and the niyamas, the first two limbs of Ashtanga yoga, the meditation framework. And really it amounts to ethics, ethical behavior. And again, not as a judgment or from either society or a religious perspective, but rather than empirically, it was, and you can discover this on your own. If you try to restrain from certain things and then try to do certain things, you get more out of meditation. So that leads to, okay, so now we're living a reasonable lifestyle that we can actually even have the time to sit down and meditate in a space that's safe to meditate in. Which is, I mean, that's another part of ethics. If you're out, I don't know, raping and pillaging and plundering, then you probably can't sit still and meditate. So now that you've gotten that under control and you're ready to sit down, which is literally the meaning of the word asana. And the word asana is popular in the West in contemporary, physical yoga classes, because all the yoga poses in Sanskrit end in the word asana. Like downward dog is Adho Mukha Shavasana or something. And then when you're laying down flat, that's Shavasana. So it all ends in asana. That word, suffix asana, literally means seat or a manner of sitting. And the idea here is just to find any pose that's comfortable for you to sit for a long period of time to concentrate the mind or empty the mind or practice any of these exercises. First, you have to sit. And sometimes it's hard to sit without pain. And another issue is over a long period of time, if you want to meditate for many years, it's nice to have a healthy body, because when your body's not healthy, that's a distraction. So yoga kind of forked later and developed Hatha yoga. Hatha, I think, means forceful or sun, moon, different things. But that's where all these poses come from that you see in contemporary Western yoga. And, because the West is the way we are, obsessed with the body and exercise, that's really what we latched onto. And factually, health-wise, a lot of people in the West can't sit still in a meditative position without pain. So it's probably useful to have yoga understood here in the West as a set of poses, because we need to get the body under control to be able to sit still without pain in order to meditate. A lot of different recommended poses when you're going to meditate, but usually for me, it's just to sit down, either in a chair or on the floor. And in the diagram, and thanks to an artist by the name of Karma Moffat, he drew all these. I think his website's karmamoffatart.com. These poses represent a sequence of yoga poses called the sun salutation. And I do them. I practice these several times throughout the day just to keep my back healthy and, to help unwind some of the damage I get from sitting in a chair staring at the computer. And that helps me sit and meditate better. So you can do research on sun salutation if you want to get some good stretches combined with breath. You can also just lay on the floor flat, laying down on your back to meditate. And there's also, if you want to practice walking and meditating, some things I like to do is count the breaths along with my footsteps. So Jeff, is there like a correlate to asana in the Pali or the Eightfold Path?
Yeah, so in the early Buddhist texts, you have standing, walking, sitting, or lying are all given kind of the same priority. Kind of like they will more often mention sitting than other ones, but they're all considered valuable. In I think almost all forms of modern Buddhism, meditation is usually considered a sitting task.
Yeah.
The Theravadins are kind of, and especially the Mahasi, the guy we were talking about last week, they put a lot of focus on walking as well, but even for them, it's 50-50 walking and sitting.
Yeah.
And they're probably the most on the walking side of anybody. So anyhow, it's pretty similar kind of thing.
I feel like, sitting is the first thing to practice, because it's really hard to keep your mind still when you're outside looking at things, walking. There's so much distraction and opportunity to jump into the senses of hearing, the senses of smelling, the senses of seeing when you're outside moving around, interacting. So, sitting down in a quiet spot is probably the best way to start and to maintain a meditative practice kind of throughout your life. However, once you get decent at that, I like to practice walking and seeing if I can maintain some semblance of a calm mind. It's amazing when you start to notice how easily you get distracted by stimuli in the environment, whether it's a sound or, a sight, and then, return back to like focusing on the breath, and then boom, distraction. It's amazing.
Yeah, I would say walking is actually, to me, maybe the better starting point, which disagrees with everybody else. Everybody says sitting is better. But to me, I think that, like you were saying, a lot of people really have trouble just sitting still. And you can sit there just being frustrated and angry for an hour, which isn't fun for you. It's not really developing any kind of meditative abilities. It just it's just kind of unpleasant. Whereas walking, I think if you can find a spot where there aren't a lot of distractions, where you can maybe walk just 10 feet in one direction, turn around, walk 10 feet back, and repeat that while keeping your concentration either on the breath or on your steps, that you can learn most of the same things that you're going to learn in sitting meditation. You can't get to the same depth of concentration, obviously, because you're moving around. But the thing is, at the beginning, you're not going to have any deep concentration anyway. Your concentration is going to suck. So to me, walking is a way to kind of ease into it and then sit down. Also, like just being a little bit tired out helps with sitting. So I would vote for that. I think, especially just, yeah, you're right. Try sitting, but if you're having trouble with it and you find yourself just getting angry and you think you're doing it wrong,
Yeah.
having trouble, try walking for half an hour, an hour.
So now that we've got limbs 1, 2, and 3. So limbs 1 and 2, kind of our life preparations. We've gotten our life under control to the point where we're not in the middle of violence, so we can actually sit down still somewhere. That's limbs 1 and 2. Now we're sitting down comfortably, limb 3. Now, get a hold of the breath. And this was an amazing insight for me. Sometimes I'm just not breathing. And certainly the breath is doing its own thing, almost automatically, without my. Sometimes it's really shallow, maybe when I'm frightened, or maybe I'm not breathing at all when I'm angry. So getting a hold of the breath is limb 4, prana yama. Prana means vital energy or breath. Yama means expansion or control. So pranayama is this practice of breath regulation. And in yogic, I think in yogic science or metaphysics, it's safe to say that mental activity can be correlated to the breath. So there's a set of breathing exercises in pranayama, and there's a lot of different breathing exercises in this meditation framework, just as well as in the Eightfold Path or in Buddhism too. Yeah, Jeff, you want to talk about some of the? No, I think the Buddhist perspective is it's less about controlling the breath and more about becoming aware of the breath.
Yeah. Yeah. I think every discussion of meditation, well, so not every type of meditation involves the breath, but all of the ones that do involve the breath are about watching it, being aware of it. And it is, I think the mental activity part is important too, watching the correlation of mental activity to the patterns of the breath. And I think that maybe there's a sense that you do control it, but you're not controlling it just by being knowledgeable about how the mental activity correlates to the breath. The breath does behave in different ways, but you don't consciously say, breathe faster, breathe slower. And there is counting breaths in some, but you're not counting like in pranayama where you count in order to maintain a certain duration. You're just counting the number of breaths. As far as I know, I don't know of anybody doing breath control. Well, maybe. Hey, we have a blurry
meditation
visitor.
podcast. Yeah, you're in the podcast, buddy. All right, looks good. All right, so now that you've sat down and gotten control of the breath, either just through observation of it or through exercises where you're actually controlling it, now what? Limb 5, detachment. In Sanskrit, pratyahara, which is an interesting word. I think it literally means, release from attachment to the objects of the senses, like away from food, anything taken into ourselves from outside. So that's pratyahara. And it can be likened to, when you sit down And you just bring your awareness from outside within, like inside, for the first time. So you're detaching from the physical senses. You're not using the eyes to look outward. You're not using the ears to listen. You're not using the nose to smell, or the tongue to taste, or the fingers to feel. You've detached from those senses, withdrawal from the senses, and now you've brought your attention or awareness within, either looking at something in the mind stream, like thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, whatever's going on, or a little more literally looking within the body, like moving your awareness to the belly, or moving your awareness to your left foot. So detachment, pratyahara. And this was an exercise recommended to me by a friend who's a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher. Sit comfortably with the spine straight. You can close the eyes. Simply notice a sound far away. It's using the sense of hearing. Now notice a sound nearby. If there isn't one, just make one. Now listen to the sound of your breath. And now notice what's going on in the mind. What thought did you just have? And so that's kind of pratyahara right there. Moving from an outside sense to looking within, which leads to the ability to concentrate now. Now that our attention is within, or our awareness is focused within, we can keep it there for an extended period of time, maybe a few seconds. Now, you can also concentrate on something external using the senses, and it's a good way to practice concentration, to just stare at a candle flame for a few minutes. And there's an exercise, Trataka, that we'll introduce later about that. Limb 6, dharana, means concentration. Literally, da, to hold, carry, or support, meaning what is the thing that carries your mind or your thought or your awareness? Where is it? What is it concentrated on? Is it something outside, or is it something within? Jeff, what say ye about dharana?
So this, I think, might be just a linguistic difference between Buddhism and yoga. I haven't quite figured it out, but anyhow, concentration, what's translated as concentration, is the eighth part of the Eightfold Path. It's the culmination of the path, in a way. But the word that they use for concentration is samadhi, which you are also going to put as your eighth limb coming up. Preview.
Yeah. Huh.
So, well, anyhow, it's kind of interesting. And then on the pratyahara part, that's not an explicitly mentioned task in the path, but in any description of meditation, they do have two things that sound a lot like pratyahara. The first one is every meditation text starts with going somewhere where you won't be disturbed, like the foot of a tree where there's no people around.
Right.
So there's a physical removing your senses from the outside world. Yep. And then there's a second step of it after you've started meditating, where in the higher states of concentration, you even become incapable of accessing your sense bases. So you might not even hear a loud noise if you're fully concentrated. So it definitely exists, but it's not called out in quite the same way. Anyhow, we're pretty similar. Yeah. Pretty similar tasks here.
And it's a logical kind of sequential series of events that happen mentally during the practice. I mean, you could break it down, be good, do good, so your mind's not disturbed. Sit down. What's going on with the breath? What's going on with the mind? Now hold the mind onto one object. And now that you're doing that, this is the next limb. Keep it there. So limb 6 sort of moves into limb 7. Concentration becomes meditation, or dharana becomes dhyana, which is the 7th limb of Ashtanga Yoga. Dhyana translated as meditation. And is distinguished only by its uninterrupted nature. Dharana culminates in dhyana. Concentration culminates in meditation. Once you've brought the mental awareness onto one object, instead of many, which the normal state of mind is many-mindedness. You're looking at something outside, you're having a thought about what you just looked at. Maybe now you're having a memory, maybe not now an imagination, maybe now something else outside. So we're context switching. So now we get a hold of the mind and put it on one thing, concentrate it onto one thing. And now we keep it there for consecutive moments in time. That's how concentration becomes meditation. Meditation implies for a period of time. I like that analogy, which I believe I got from the book Ashtanga Yoga Primer from Baba Hari Das. Conceptually analogous to pouring water or pouring oil. In dharana, concentration, the water falls in a broken stream of drops, whereas in dhyana, the stream of oil is smooth, constant, and unbroken. And I think I've found that when I've practiced concentrating on something in the mind. At first, I've got it there, and then it's broken by a distraction. Then I'm back to the object of concentration, and then it's broken by a distraction. And then when I start to calm down more and get better at it, it's more of a smooth flow where you're actually meditating on that object. And that's a very discrete state change in the mind, I believe. There's a commentary box there, which I lifted from a book by this gentleman named Swami Vivekananda. And he was a yogi who came to the US. I don't know, maybe it's the late 1800s or something, and spoke at a congress in Chicago. And this book, Raja Yoga, I think was the name of it. Yeah, he was very precise about the time. He sort of said, hey, if you can hold your awareness concentrated on one object for 12 seconds, we would kind of consider that dharana, concentration. Now, do that for 12 times 12 seconds, like 144 seconds, about 2.5 minutes. He said, that's really more like meditation. And then he went on to say, if you can maintain that for another 12 times, which is about 25 minutes, it becomes this, samadhi, the 8th limb of Ashtanga Yoga, which is an interesting word, difficult to interpret in the West. I interpret it as complete total integration or complete absorption into whatever the object is that you're meditating on. So it's a little bit different, super consciousness, meaning different above or different than normal consciousness, where your mind can be distracted by many objects. You're so absorbed in one object that even the idea that you exist is gone, because that's also a thought. So just as dharana, concentration, culminates in dhyana, meditation culminates in samadhi, integration or absorption, both in the very acute sense during a meditation session, if you can do it for that long, and maybe, and this is, I think, something more emphasized in Buddhism, in a life sense, you can start to achieve samadhi more and more frequently and bring that into the plane, the material plane. Talk about that, Jeff.
Yeah. So samadhi is in Buddhism so it definitely exists. Like this stuff is very similar. There's some like slight terminology differences, but like it's almost exactly the same thing. But I think in Buddhism it would agree that you can't entirely bring it into your life. Samadhi is a constructed state. It's not permanent. It's not, so it's really pleasant, but it's temporary, and it's a way of allowing you this gets back to what I was saying about pratyahara. Rather than doing pratyahara first, this is a way to practice pratyahara, a way to practice renunciation and sense restraint, because you have a pleasant state that you can be in, which isn't dependent on the senses. So normally in your day-to-day life, you're going to say, oh, I want a cookie. Peter and I were just talking about this yesterday. I ordered a cookie and I ended up getting 120 cookies instead of one cookie in the mail. So either they messed up my order or I did, but your desires for things tend to cause problems, right? Your desires for sensual satisfaction cause a lot of issues. In Buddhism, those are seen as like the root issue that you have. And so samadhi is a way of temporarily suppressing those desires, so that you can then get into a permanent state, which is different from samadhi.
Right.
So
That is a little different. This is almost like again a mental state, samadhi, in yoga, at least in Ashtanga Yoga, where there's a concept of, whatever the mind is focusing on at this moment, in a way that sort of becomes recorded as the past, as a memory, as an imprint. There's a word samskara, which is almost like an imprint, like a mental image that's recorded somehow. And the evidence of that is, hey, what did you have for breakfast today? And maybe a thought came to mind. Maybe it was a bowl of oatmeal, like me. Where did that come from? So when you're in samadhi, however, that which is recorded is that sort of state of emptiness or nothingness. And the more frequently you practice and enter into that samadhi state, the more the mind itself starts to calm, so that your general nature perhaps is a little bit just more relaxed, more peaceful. Maybe that's where the pleasantness comes from.
yeah, and I think that's all very similar. It's just that there is that little caution that, so that maybe goes back to when I was asking about what's the purpose of this whole path overall. So in Buddhism, they make a clear distinction to say that samadhi, while it's the end state of the path, it's not the purpose or goal, which is nirvana, which is a term probably everybody knows. And you shouldn't confuse samadhi with nirvana, that they are different things. Samadhi is a temporary fabricated state that's used for the purpose of getting to nirvana, and it's very pleasant, and it's easy to confuse it with it too. That's the other thing. It's like extremely pleasant. You might think this is the state, I think, at least in Buddhism, where people will start saying, I'm one with God. They describe a unity. And so Buddhism would caution, hey, don't get stuck here. This isn't the goal. This is a step.
Right.
Well,
you also got, Lao Tzu, like the only goal is to have no goal. The only purpose is to have no purpose. So what's the purpose of practicing a meditation, or, at least even the steps of the meditation framework to have a good meditation? And I suppose, just to get a little more peaceful in life if you're disturbed, or maybe just to get a little better in life, to achieve some sort of mastery and presence in everything that you do. Or if you are of that nature, become a renunciate, give it all up, move to the desert, and seek a spiritual life. I think that's perfectly reasonable. It's built into the fabric of the Indian culture. And there's some philosopher, Maslow, that I think talks a little bit about it. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where eventually you get to the point in life where you've satisfied all your goals, and now you maybe seek something else beyond just the goals and the amenities of what we have here in the material universe, in the machine, so to speak. So now we'll, I think, close with an exercise. We talked about this earlier, Trataka, which means gaze, to look at our gaze. And it involves staring at a single point externally for a while, like stare at the candle flame for a while. That's a good one to do at home if you've got a candle. And you can do research on Trataka. There's a lot of people that have online videos on how to do it. You maintain the gaze on the candle flame for as long as you can, maybe 5 minutes. Ideally, you don't blink, but if that's painful, you got to do what you got to do. And then after a few minutes, you close the eyes. And now this is where the mental concentration comes. When you close the eyes, you'll see this flame that you were just looking at externally. And, it might look a little different. It might be black and white. It might be inverted, whatever. Find it and look at it, the mental version of it, for as long as you can. Now, since I don't have a candle here, you can also do it with a dot on a piece of paper. So let's try it. First, just take a deep breath. Hold it. Let it out. And hold it. Sure you're sitting comfortably with your back straight. Focus your gaze or your awareness on that dot on the screen. And let's keep it there for a minute or two. Don't strain if you have to blink, but for the sake of experimentation, practice it. Look at it without blinking. And breathe while you're looking at it. And we'll just continue looking at that black dot in the middle of the screen for a little bit longer. I blinked. Don't blink. Remember to breathe. As your mind wanders, bring your concentration back to the dot. And your mind will wander. A lot of distracting thoughts. It's normal, expected. The practice is to bring it back to the dot when you get distracted. And we'll just do a little bit longer, gazing at the dot. And now close your eyes. With the eyes closed, see if you can find something like a dot. It might be an inverted, different, like a white dot instead of a black dot. Once you find it, concentrate on it for as long as you can. It might move a little bit. That's okay. Let it move. Keep breathing. And eventually it'll start to fade away. And that's the end of the exercise. Open your eyes. So Trataka, I recommend you can research that and do it with a candle flame if you have a candle available. Jeff, closing remarks before we end this podcast.
Yeah, it was kind of fun. I've done that with the candle flame, and we've even done it on video with a YouTube candle flame, and it seemed to work fine. This one was kind of funny, but the after image was the whole screen. Like the screen was the candle.
That happened to me too. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, guys.